What is going on, everybody? It is your guy Tyler with Mom's Basement MMA, and I got a good one for you. My next guest fights at a Nick Catone MMA in New Jersey. He is an ammy 135er. He has an ammy record of 4 victories, 1 defeat, none other than the remarkable Bill Markle. Bill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing phenomenal. Thank you for having me on, man. Very excited for this.
Well, it's an honor to have you on, and first and foremost, I have to congratulate you on your most recent dub. I know you fought post the CFFC fight. I know you fought after that earlier this summer, and you put together a convincing victory. What were your thoughts on that, and did your most recent bout go exactly like you had hoped it would?
I don't want to say I was disappointed in my performance in that fight, but I definitely think out of all my other fights, like any one of my other fights, it's definitely one that I didn't do my best. Like I should have done better. I broke my hand in the first round of that fight, and that's why I haven't been active since. I had to get like surgery, put a nice little metal plate in my hand. I got to give credit to my opponent, Brett Floyd, and I said it like in post-fight interview. Kid's a dog. Like he came forward, he was well-rounded everywhere, striking, grappling. And he came forward and wanted to fight, and it was a good fight. I won all the rounds. I had good grappling exchanges, good striking exchanges, a lot of things I wanted. But I feel like I had a big adrenaline pump from like me breaking my hand, which I've never had before in any other fight. Like where I was like adrenaline pumping, ready to go, like a little bit too much. And I feel like the hand definitely played a little bit of a factor in there, but I still won the fight. That's all that matters for me. Add it onto my resume, and then I'm hoping to get back in there early next year now that my hand's getting fully recovered and whatnot.
So, Bill, what round did you break your hand in? Do you know?
First round.
Oh, Jesus.
I dropped him, and at some point during the exchange, like either like right before or right after, it's like sometimes with the small gloves, like I have amateur boxing fights, so it's like I was used to like hitting with more like bigger gloves, like 10-ounce gloves,
right?
And then whenever I do like actual like MMA fights, like it's like I'll hit him sometimes and my hand will hurt a little bit, but then I throw the next punch, my hand feels fine. Right. And then it was like this fight, I hit him, my hand hurt a lot, and then I threw the next punch, my hand hurt even more, and I was like, I think we have an issue here. And then I just kept going, and then I still used the hand, I still grappled the whole nine, and yeah. But first round, probably like some odd minutes into the fight. But
did you know when you went to your corner that it was broken?
Yeah, I didn't say anything though.
Yeah.
They kind of like picked up on it. I feel like towards later in the fight, like I started like not use my right hand as much. I was still using it. Don't get me wrong, but I wasn't like committing to it as much as I normally would. And especially where it's like I dropped in the first round when it happened, so I feel like they kind of thought that'd come out a little bit more like trying to set it on up. But I was just more like adrenaline too pumped up, just trying to win the fight at that point. And yeah, I was still technical, but I definitely wasn't as technical as I should have been.
I kind of wonder, and obviously you being the fighter, you tell me, if you're gonna break a hand, is it kind of like better to break the one that you did? And the reason why I say that is because when you throw out your jab, I know you're an orthodox fighter. You throw out your jab, you throw out your left repeatedly. I think it would be more of an issue if you broke your left. Because if you're not able to jab, and now all of a sudden, like you're throwing a jab, you're switching stances and throwing with your right. Like I don't know. I think that you can at least hide it a lot better with your right hand.
I actually very much agree with you. Especially, it's based on the individual. I think because some people like the pot shot their punches where they throw like one big punch, one big overhand, one big hook. But I like to think of myself as like a pressure volume fighter. So it's like if you put like punch count, like boxing wise, and you counted like how many times I throw my left hand versus how many times I throw my right hand, it's usually like a 3-to-1 ratio, right? You throw my left hand 3 times more than I throw my right.
Right.
So it's like a lot of jabs, a lot of hooks, a lot of body work, and then I use my right hand up top, overhand, across the body, this and that. So honestly, if I broke my left hand, I'd definitely be more in a panic mode where I'm like, oh my God. And I could fight lefty. Like I'm actually like a natural lefty, so I can fight lefty as a fight righty. But I'd definitely be more in a panic mode if I lost my left hand, like in a
Yeah,
fight.
and I was kind of thinking the same. Like, okay, pretending I'm a fighter, like I am a southpaw, so it's like I
Uh-huh.
would rather break my left hand because I
Hmm.
could hide it better. Like,
Hmm.
that's just kind of like my mindset. And Bill, I wanted to just mention, like, you fight at Nick Catone MMA, and having looked at your film, looking at your fights, and just studying up on you, I have to tell you, you're like one of the most like well-rounded fighters on the AMI scene that I've seen in quite some time. I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about what training at your gym is like, and just kind of how your game has evolved since you've been there.
I've only been here for about like a year and a half now, 2 years. And honestly, I got to give so much credit to Coach Nick and Coach Shorty. They've completely changed my game. They made me a more well-rounded mixed martial artist. And it's like we have such high-level pros and amateurs in here day in and day out. That's like it's impossible not to get better as long as you just show up and work. And I also got to give a shout out where I cross trained at Strategic Combat Academy in Sayreville, New Jersey. That's like one of my home base gyms where it's like I was there at 11 years old, like a young kid, like pretty much. And it's like always like training the in and out. And then like I do a lot of my jujitsu out of there, but 13 years old. And it's just like, yeah, I felt a lot better training more at Nicotone since, and like my wrestling's improved, my like overall mixed martial arts has improved, which it's MMA, it's not jiu-jitsu, it's not boxing, it's not kickboxing, it's like overall being able to put everything together. And I think Coach Shorty and then Coach Nick here at Nicotone MMA, they do a phenomenal job putting it all together where it's like punching into takedowns, punching, defending takedowns, and then like short jitsu, being able to strike and grapple, strike to open up grappling exchanges, like defending strikes into submissions in this mat. So got to give a lot of credit to them. They're phenomenal coaches and great people.
When I study fights and when I look at the fights that you've had, like if I can't pick up right away on like a particular discipline, and I'm usually able to. Usually I'm like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
guy's predominantly like he likes Muay Thai, or oh, this guy's
Mm-hmm.
a wrestler. This guy likes to take things down to the ground. But I get really excited if I like study a lot of film. I'm like, I can't put my finger on it. I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
After all of that studying, I still don't know like which particular discipline. I get excited because that means you're difficult to game plan for.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have other opponents, particularly at that AMI level, where I feel like skills at that level, you're able to like when someone's a kickboxer, it's really, really obvious in the AMI scene because they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
shoot more often than not. They're going to stick to
Mm-hmm.
like what they know first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. Like that's a bit of a generalization, but more often than not, I think that's true. And and when you look at like all the fights that you've had, do you feel like when people look at your film, there's like something that they think is a perceived weakness of yours that you think is kind of funny?
I think my first loss ever, I got submitted third round. So I feel like maybe people think my jujitsu is like my weaker aspect, but I was an 18-year-old kid. I didn't really even train a lot of jujitsu back then. And now I'm a pro level in jiu-jitsu. I've had submission wins. I've wrestled to win fights. I've ground and pounded to get win fights by points. So I feel like if you were gonna generalize like, oh, how do you beat me? I feel like people would think it's jiu-jitsu taking me down, this and that. But I have phenomenal wrestling at this point. I have great jiu-jitsu at this point. And I think even my jiu-jitsu off my back is probably my most dangerous aspect to my jiu-jitsu game, where it's like I have a really good close guard, I have a really good open guard, I can transition from there. But I would think it was like something like that, or maybe even like more keeping at a kicking distance. But it's MMA where it's like if you kick me, I'm gonna punch, I'm gonna go for a takedown a lot of the times. But I go to throw kicks myself. But I like to be a mixed martial artist. I don't want to be like a one trick pony. I like if you watch my fights, there's been times where it's like I was forced to wrestle, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
the easiest. I try to think about the easiest route to victory, and then sometimes I was forced to wrestle to win the fight. Sometimes I was forced more to strike, hit, move to win the fight. So I like to think I'm a mixed martial artist.
I think you earned the title, and there are two things that make me say that. There are two things that you hit on that I think you back up. Like you've backed it up what you just said with
Mm-hmm.
actions, and that was during the fight at CFFC 95. There are two things that happened in that bout, and that's actually my favorite fight of yours. I think you're able to display just how well-rounded and balanced of a fighter that you are. There are two things that stood out to me that you addressed. Number one, you talked about people maybe trying to like flex jiu-jitsu on you and that being a perceived weakness. But there was a moment in that bout, I think it was in the second round, it gets a takedown on you, but you're able to reverse position really, really quickly and go for a submission that was super, super slick, and it was right in the middle of the cage. I was surprised he got out of that. I thought you were going to take it right there.
I went for Umaplata when he shot in, and it was one of those things where I don't hit a lot of Umaplatas, but I use Umaplatas for jiu-jitsu transition a lot. That's actually like short jiu-jitsu 101. We do that a lot. And then I thought that I didn't have it, like wholeheartedly. Like if you could probably see my facial reaction, I thought that I was just doing that to transition to his back. And then in like a second, I was like, oh, I have this. I was like, that's when I started like hipping on in. I started grabbing his wrist, and then he turned on out. But wholeheartedly, when it was like he went for it, I was like, oh, I'm going to use this to take his back, try to ground and pound from here. And then I sat on up, and I'm like, oh, I have this. Let's go for it, baby. Right. And then I was going for it. I'm actually very upset where it's like out of all my fights, I really wanted a photo of like a professional photo of me hitting that, because it was like out of any one of my fights, that was probably a highlight for me, because I was like, oh, hell yeah. I'm like, let's go. Because Umaplata is not a high percentage move usually. Mm-hmm. And they actually said it during the broadcast. The night beforehand, because CFFC was doing like 2-night shows, was the first time that someone ever hit a Umaplata during like a CFFC event, or maybe the second time, first or second. CM Punk said it, and then he was like, "Are you about to see the third one or the second one?" And I thought I was going to have it. Well, I thought I had it for a moment, but he rolled on out. But I was still very happy with the transition.
There's another really interesting point in the fight. You talk about. So we talked about people attacking jiu-jitsu. The second thing you just said was the perception of, oh, people will throw kicks at me. This guy did that. You caught one of his kicks, and you were able to really get a really slick takedown on him and get in top control, maintain top control, and you were able to like piece him up with a lot of really good strikes from that position. That just really made me excited to see that the things that you talked about, your perceived weaknesses, like you were able to actually turn the tables on your opponents for trying to engage you in that way.
I actually have got to give a lot of credit to my opponent in that fight, because all of his previous fights, he was more of a wrestler. He was like ranked very high in Tapology at that point. He was wrestling a lot of people, big slams. And going into that fight, I took that fight on 3 weeks' notice. And watching his film, we all thought that he was like, at that point, previously in his fights, not in a bad way, his striking wasn't all that.
Right.
And then he came out and he hit me a few times. He started striking. I was very impressed. It was like one of the first events post-COVID with like amateurs and all that. So it was like he definitely worked on his striking during the fight. But I thought that he was going to just try to wrestle a little bit more. And I told like Ryan Rizco, he's like my brother, and he's a pro CFFC 155, or he's fighting in 2 weeks. I told him the whole like lead up on 3 weeks notice. I was like, if he tries to kick me, because he's throwing kicks all the other fights, I was like, he tries to kick me one time, I'm going to shoot for a takedown. I'm like, especially where he's supposedly be like, he's ideally like a wrestler. We thought they were going to try to wrestle me. I was like, let's put him on his back and see how he feels in that type of position, especially where it's like PA has pro-am rules, right? You're ground and pounds in the face. So that's definitely, I was hyped about that too, where it's like, I said it to everyone, I was like, he kicks me more than once, I'm going to shoot for a takedown. I'm going to try to catch and go.
So you were ready for it then? You were ready?
I told everyone, I do that a lot during like normal, like training day in, day out. And because he was like supposed to be more of a wrestler, I was like, if he keeps on trying to kick me, keeping me at a kicking range and then shoot from a takedown from there, which he did during the fight. That's actually when I hit the Umaplata. He was keeping me at distance, and then he took like a wide shot on in, got the takedown, and then during this transition, I went for the Umaplata. I was like, if he throws more than one kick, I'm going to try to catch a kick, go for a takedown, and played out just like that in the first round. And I thought it was definitely a good exchange for me, because it also gets him like guessing, where it's like he thought that I wanted to strike more. Like, I like to think about like style-wise, like matchups, where it's like ideally it's like wrestler versus striker. And then once I shoot for a takedown, it's more in his head. He's like, oh, he could wrestle too. Just like how when he came out threw a right hand right off the bat and it landed. I was like, oh, all right, he's striking out better. Let's see how this goes. So yeah.
I did feel like you had an advantage in almost every facet of the game. Like, there's no comparison between his striking and your striking. Your punches are a lot tighter. I feel like they were able to do a lot more damage to him too. There was a point at the very end of the first round. I have to ask you, I was watching this fight and I blew it up as best I could. and I watched it as slow as I could, and I still don't know the answer, but I know you'll be honest with me, give it to me straight. Did you sit him down with that right, or did he really slip?
Round one, I dropped him. CM
Okay.
Punk does not give credit to that. CM Punk, not my guy, all right? But round two, I will fully admit he slipped a few
Yeah.
times through round two. I think his corner spilled water
Yeah,
in
yeah.
between the rounds. But I hit him and I like felt it was like um people say when you drop someone, you like it feels as if the punch didn't even land.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I knew. I hit him. It was like a jab cross. It was like he threw a jab cross. I think I slipped. It came back on a jab cross.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like I didn't even land it. He goes down. And in my head, I was like, oh, he's rock. And that's when I start going for more punches. I get him against the cage. I start working for the takedown.
Yeah, because that was the only way I was able to watch that fight was just like through Facebook or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not really the best quality. So you look at
For
it,
sure.
and I even now I'm like looking at it and zoom like had it been on my television, it would have been obvious. But
Mm-hmm.
I looked at his footwork. I'm like, I don't see the slip. I don't see it. And when you hit him, it's because of the quality of the broadcast. I wasn't able to tell if you were able to land that
Mm-hmm.
clean or if you partially blocked it or what. So I wasn't sure.
I I think if I didn't like rock him, like if I didn't drop him, I definitely rocked him where he was definitely stunned. I feel like his like one foot like gave on out a little bit, like wasn't like a slip where it's like your equilibrium gets all messed up and he starts
Right.
giving on out, and then yeah.
Pivoting out or kind of broadening our focus a little bit. You had your first ammy bout in 2015. That was 6 years ago. And there was like
Mm-hmm.
a gap from 15 to I don't think you fought again until 2019. So what was up with your gap? Like were you like, hiking in Kilimanjaro and like finding yourself or what?
I was doing a lot of jujitsu work.
Got it.
I boxed a lot growing up, like as a teenager, and I trained a little bit of everything. But it was like I started taking boxing fights, and then I won like the New Jersey Diamond Gloves. I thought that I was just more of like a boxer, and wholeheartedly, I was like a stuck up 18-year-old kid, not in a bad way. Where it's like I took my first amateur MMA fight. In my head, I was like, because I wrestled a little bit growing up, not like a
Right.
wrestler, but I wrestled a little bit. I didn't have like horrendous wrestling, but I didn't have great wrestling, and I was like, I'll go out there and I'll just stuff the takedown, outbox the kid. And it was a tough fight. He submitted me in the third round, and then I took it. That fight was October 2015, and then I didn't fight again until May 2018. And I was just focusing on my jiu-jitsu a lot. I competed in jiu-jitsu tournaments. I was working. I was training. I was never out of the gym. I feel like that's also why you see like the skill level like went up.
Right.
Like I was never like out of the gym, but I was definitely focusing on more MMA, getting my jiu-jitsu up. I went from being like a no stripe white belt to getting like my blue belt and a few stripes by the time I got back into the gym, back into my next fight, and just working on my overall MMA game.
What's interesting is you're a young guy and you're not even in your athletic prime yet, but at the same time you've like been around the sport for a really long time. I know that sounds kind of contradictory, but
Mm-hmm.
from your first fight in 2015 to now, here we are. It's in 2021. I wanted to ask you specifically, Bill, not so much about your career, but more about just mixed martial arts in general. I feel like when you first started, even in 2015, that wasn't that long ago. But in MMA years, it really was. Like the sport
Mm-hmm.
has exploded in popularity since then. And I would imagine when you told people in 2015, 2014, or whatever, like, yeah, I fight MMA, and people are like, cage fighting? Like, oh, Jesus Christ, what the hell's wrong with you? Whereas today, if you were to talk about it, I feel like, mixed martial arts, it's on ESPN. Like, it's on
Mm-hmm.
Bellator's on Showtime. Like, it's way more mainstream and way less edgy compared to, like, something as recent as 2015. Can you talk a little bit about how do people perceive you as a fighter from 2015 as opposed to they might today? And have you seen like more and more people take up interest in it? Like, are there a lot more people in your gym now? Can you just talk a little bit about the evolution? Like, how has MMA evolved from when you first started compared to today?
It's funny that you say that because I'm from like a really small town. Like my graduating class is like 130 kids, and I feel like when I was in high school, that's when like I started taking amateur boxing fights. I had my first amateur MMA fight the following September after graduating high school. And when I was in high school, teachers, like my fellow students, they all kind of looked at me like I was a little crazy and like as if I was like fighting people bare knuckle, like crazy in back alleys, stuff like that. when I like to think of myself as like a martial artist deep down. And nowadays it's funny, like when I fought for CFFC, it's like people from my town are like reposting it, commenting on it. Like I have a lot of time for my sport, a lot of support for my town, Spotswood, New Jersey. And back then, I feel like like even when I won like New Jersey Diamond Gloves, it was like a big state tournament. Had some support back then, but I thought that I come from a really small town, I'd get a little bit more support. But then now it's like people around town when they see me, they like know more about the sport. People like more intelligent questions, and they support me a lot. I have a lot of like pride for my town. I love Spotswood, New Jersey. It's my roots, blue collar, and yeah, it's definitely that's where I see the biggest difference. Where it's like back then they looked at me like I was a lunatic.
Sure.
Now it's like a lot of support, a lot of love. Like people will they send me photos of like when I fought for CFFC, watching it on their TV. Like people like my high school principal like shouting me out on Facebook, and it's really it makes my heart happy seeing it, and it makes me happy that the sport's more evolved.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, for me, and maybe it's just because this is like the only sport I care about or cover,
Me too.
I just look at you like I don't like I would look at you like at a foot like as I would a baseball player or a football player. Like I know it's apples and oranges, but at the same time it's like you're an athlete just like them. There's really no
Yeah,
difference. I mean,
for sure.
that's how I
And
look at it.
I feel like football. Like I played a little Pop Warner football growing up, and I feel like I took more like brain trauma, like very typical of fighter saying this, like more brain trauma playing football. Like I remember going like head on, but like other like kids, and like getting up and having like the stingers going up and down my spine, like the weird
Right.
tingles, and just like head on collisions all the time. But yeah, I feel like it's like an athlete, and like I like to handle myself as a professional athlete, even though I'm still amateur. And I said that after one of my fights before when I got interviewed, I was like, I want to be a professional athlete. It's like dressing for the job you want, not the job you have. Where it's like I try to treat
Absolutely.
everything as professional. Where it's like I dedicate time to my training, I dedicate time to my rest, I dedicate time to like making sure that I'm like doing what I need to do.
Bill, what are some changes you'd like to see in the sport of mixed martial arts?
I think right off the bat, like you even said, pay. I think fighters need to get paid more. It's like ridiculous thing about the money that you make in boxing, where it's like there's no named like high level boxers, which is also shameful that people don't know these boxers. But it's like these like co-main event boxers that no one has ever heard of that are making millions and millions of dollars a fight, making more than UFC champs, Bellator champs. I think the pay is definitely a huge issue, and I think one of the biggest issues is judging, where it's like a lot of judges aren't paying attention of the fight. They don't know what they're seeing. They don't know what's going on, and I think they need to do a whole new system where like judges should be like more educated, maybe get like reevaluated, where it's like you need to know if I'm controlling someone, know if I'm going for a submission. Is this a good position for me? Is this a bad position for me? Am I winning this round? Am I losing this round? And everyone has their own way of scoring, where some people might be a little bit more, they prefer strikers, prefer more wrestling, prefer more control.
Right.
But having at least an understanding of whatever you prefer and then going with it instead of like I feel like you'll see it sometimes with fights where like it'll be two fights back to back with close decisions, where it's like one judge will give it to the one fighter who's wrestling a little bit more, but in the next fight, not give it to the fighter who's wrestling a little bit more. So it's not like a consistent bias, and it makes me think that maybe they're not really paying attention to the fight, and maybe they don't really know what they're like saying or doing. It's like, you know what, I'll give it to this guy, I'll give it to this guy, and win bonuses are a thing. Like you're taking pay away from fighters, and it's
Right.
just not fair.
Yeah. And when it comes to officiating and scoring, now we're talking about the states and their specific athletic commissions. And what I'd like to see from an athletic commission standpoint is, what are the credentials you need to be a ref in some of these states? What are the credentials you need to score fights? And for me, I'm not saying I'm qualified to be a referee because I'm certainly not, and I would never want that job. But I know I could do a better job of scoring some of these fights. I know what I'm seeing. I could do
For
that.
sure.
And I look at it, and it's just kind of like, what are the credentials? What's required to score a fight? And would the sport be better off, like, if there are three judges, wouldn't it be better if, like, at a bare minimum, one of the judges was a former fighter at any competitive level? Like, I mean, to me, that's what I'd like to see.
100%. I think you'd even like you don't have to be a fighter as long as you even like just train. Like in reality, if you like for instance you came down to Nick Catone MMA, there's hundreds of members. if you asked, like, you walked on there and you saw this one guy, like, you see that he has done Muay Thai classes. He's even like a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, get him to judge the fight. He will do a better job, I think, than the average judge, just because he has some sort of martial arts background. And I
Absolutely.
don't like, you don't need to be both like jiu-jitsu, striking, this and that. But as long as you have a martial arts background of some sort, or like very dedicated to like understanding MMA and the whole sport, I think you do a better job. Like, I have like good friends that I know that have bare minimum training, but they're very dedicated to watching sport. They love the sport. It's like
Right.
their favorite sport. And I know for a fact they judge really good fights just because
Right.
they see a lot of fights all the time. Versus like, I feel like a lot of these judges, they only watch fights when they're judging fights. And then there's been backlash of me being like, of people seeing like, oh, that judge was on their phone during the round. Like, how are you watching a fight when you're on the phone? Like,
Yeah.
and you can't do that. It's not fair. It's not fair to the fighters.
No, it's disrespectful, actually, is what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
having been, I went to it was the first time I saw live mixed martial arts. That blows people away. I've only been to like
Mm-hmm.
one actual like MMA bout
Really?
before. Yeah, I know, that's crazy. I've been
Damn.
to a like a million years ago when I was like 19 years old and I was too young to drink. We went to Canada and I got really fucked up and I saw a Muay Thai tournament, but I was so fucked up I don't really remember anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, story for another day. But when I went to this MMA fight, I went to South Carolina to see one of my friends fight. He was actually a guest on the show, and one of the officials for that fight, this guy had to have been like, no kidding, dude, like 400 pounds. This guy was fucking huge, and he's a ref. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this guy has never fought a day in his life, and he's in there like and I'm not trying to suggest if you've never fought you're a shitty ref, but I start getting concerned, particularly for some of these smaller shows, like what has this guy done to, like, did this guy just like fill out paperwork and like pass a test and all of a sudden he's in there? I feel like that's what happens more often
I,
than not, and that's fucking terrifying to
it's
me.
100%. It's like not fair, and it's like ridiculous. Where it's like, oh, all you have to do is like an online test, get your license through the state, and the next thing you know, you're refing all these fights, and it's like not fair. Where it's like you can see really bad calls by refs. Where it's like, I heard recently of an amateur event, maybe like 2 weeks ago, three
Right.
weeks ago. I'm not gonna say the event. I don't want to
Yep, yep,
badmouth
yep.
anyone, but
Well,
the
you can
event,
say it, I'll just cut it out.
yeah, it was like a New York-based event,
Yep.
and the ref stopped the fight because he thought that someone got submitted with an armbar, and the guy's like, "I never tapped," and he was like, "Oh," and then they're both up, like staring at each other, like the two fighters, and the guy's like, "I never tapped," so the fight shouldn't have been stopped. Maybe it was a rear naked, I forget which, but it was a submission of some sort. Then the ref's like, "Fight!" Right after
What?
that, being like, fight. And then the guy who submitted the other guy's like, no, 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 no. I won the fight. I got the submission. You stopped it. You can't do that. And the other guy's like walking towards him. And I wasn't at the event, so I don't know how it ended up playing on out. But you can't, like, that's like something that people that I know witnessed that event like 2 weeks ago, where it's like ref stops the fight, thought there was a submission, there wasn't, and they're like, he's
There's
like,
only
oh,
one thing
let's
you
just
could
keep the
do in
fight
that
going.
case. It's a no contest at that point. It has to be.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like, it's also not fair to the guy who actually, like, to say if that guy actually submitted him, like, what he's
Right.
supposed to get a no contest on his record when he actually got the sub. But it's
Right.
also not fair to the other kid where you got to let him, like, if you wanted to go out, you got to let him go out. If he didn't have the sub, but it's like
Right.
a bad ref call, and then you can't be like, oh, actually, you guys now, I want you guys to fight now. Like, it doesn't
Right.
work like that, ref.
Well,
Like, you
and then
call the fight off.
absolutely, Bill. And then think about when you're a pro. Now it's like, oh, you no contested me, so now I only get my show. Like, I don't even get my freaking win bonus. Like, come on. Like, I mean, it's not just a matter of fighter safety, but now you're talking about like the impact you can make to their wallet. Like, you're talking about a 50% pay cut because some idiot didn't know what he was doing.
For sure. And it's like, that's what's really, I'm not a big fan of the win bonus system. Like, I kind of do like boxing's way, where they're more like, you're just getting flat out money, where you're whatever you make, you make.
Right.
And but it's like a larger pay, where it's like, I'd rather know that I'm making a certain amount of money, because like I've heard of fighters making like financial game plans based on them winning the fight, and then them get robbed, them
Right.
lose the fight, and it's just not a good situation. Which, like, maybe you shouldn't plan that far ahead, but it's like maybe you got paid a little bit better, maybe you didn't get robbed. You wouldn't have to depend on the win bonus to make these financial moves.
I think if there was a change in how we score fights, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it. I'm not saying this would absolutely solve the issue, but it would be interesting if there was like an open scoring format and everything was recorded and it was in real time, and that way, from a fighter, you take some less of the surprise out of it. And
For
I think
sure.
if you're gonna have the current pay structure the way it is, I think that's probably a fair thing to do. Me as a fan, I don't want to know the score until the very end, but I think as a fighter, you guys should be able to figure out what the score is, or your coaches should be able to figure that out, and it's up to them on whether they tell you or not. But that shouldn't be a closely guarded secret, at least to the fighters. It shouldn't. As a fan, I don't want to know though. I don't want to know.
It's better to wait for the
Yeah,
surprise as a
yeah, yeah,
fan.
yeah.
Watching the fight, like it's a little like you're like, let's see who's gonna get it.
Yeah.
I feel like that for sure. Like I even like close rounds, I've had fights where I won. Every time when I sit down on the bench, my first question is, did I win that round? And I ask my coaches straight up. I'm like, I had them be like, oh, it's close. I give it to you. I've also had them be like, Bill, you clearly won that round. I need you to do more of that, or like
Right.
close round, this and that. But I feel like you should know, especially as a fighter, because to say if you lost the first two rounds, even though if you might have thought you won one of them, going to that third round, you know you need to make it or break it. You're gonna go for it. Like I know I would go for it, where I'm like, I need to get this finish, or I'm not gonna win. Like I'm going for big punches, big takedowns, big submissions, like anything to finish the fight.
It's I was fortunate enough earlier this summer to have Anthony Smith on this show, and he told me, he was just like, you know what? He's like, there absolutely should be open scoring, because it's the only sport that I know of where nobody knows the score until the very end. He's like, imagine you go to a football game and you watch people just scoring a bunch of touchdowns, but you don't know, like they don't tell you what the score of the football game is until the very, very end. He's like,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be fucking crazy? And I like, people would flip out, wouldn't they? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I didn't think of it that way, but I'm like, yeah, I guess I mean, it makes sense.
It's one of those things where it's like, it's just like fighting, and it's just like all combat sports are still sports, but it's combat sports. So it's a
Right.
little bit like different, where it's like, that's why I feel like it's the only sports out there where you don't know the score until like boxing fights, MMA fights. You don't know who's winning the fight until the judges announce who's winning the fight. But I do think like open format scoring would definitely be better, because then it's like I feel fighters would push the pace a little bit more based on how the scoring's going, and then you also know where it's like, if, for instance, if a fighter wrestled heavy the first round, they thought they won the round, but the judges gave it to the other guy. It's like, oh, so they're a little bit, they don't think my control is enough to win me the round. I got to do something else. Like, I got to work for submissions more. Maybe I got to strike a little bit more. Maybe more dominant control.
You have, and speaking of dominance, I feel like you haven't really, you might disagree, but I feel like you really haven't been tested a whole lot. I feel like you've dominated all of these fights that I've seen you in. There's a huge skill gap between you and your opponents by and large. Like, as a fan, when I watched the Phelan fight, it was entertaining. It was entertaining for me because I'm a fan of you. But like, if I wasn't and I didn't know who you were and I'm watching that fight, like, it's entertaining because you're not boring and you're not one of those guys that shoot and just lay there and are boring. But it wasn't a competitive bout, is what I'm trying to say. I thought you won. Like, I was shocked that one of the judges gave that kid one of the rounds. I was like, there's no way. And for a split second, I looked at your reaction, and like, you raised an eyebrow. It was very subtle. It was very, very subtle. But like, when one of the judges gave you 29-28, like, you kind of had that WTF look for a second.
This is the issue with judges, because wholeheartedly in my head, I was like, did I just lose this fight? Like, I was
Right.
like, I thought I won all three rounds. Cause
I did too.
The only round that I thought was even close was the first round. And like I said, like, one of the first questions I asked my corners whenever I sit down, if it's a close round, I'm like, did I win that round? And they were like, you got the takedown and you dropped them. So ideally, you won that round. Like, scorecard wise, I feel like effective striking, octagon control, where it was like most of the rest of the round was like pretty even. Like, we were both exchanging on the feet, but then I dropped them and got the takedown. That should be more the defining points of that round. That should have won me the round. And then I heard that, and I've looked back, I saw the round, like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, because wholeheartedly I was like, oh, like, because I've seen really bad calls before. In my head,
Right.
I was like, will I lose this fight? Because I didn't know what the other scorecards were going to say. I'm like, if this one guy gave him the first round, what do they think of the other rounds?
right? And then how the announcer was saying it, it made it sound like it was a split decision at first,
Yeah,
right? And that's probably your biggest fear, like, oh shit, is this a split?
yeah. I was like, I thought I won, especially the last 2 rounds. I was very confident that I won the last 2 rounds. Where it's like I outstruck him in the second. I went for the omoplata. I grounded and pounded him in the second. The third round, I outstruck him. I controlled him against the cage. I stuffed his takedowns, and then I took him down in the last 20 seconds and ground and pounded him. So I was like, I think I clearly won the last 2 rounds, and then even the first round, I thought I won by dropping him and the takedown off a kick, and I just thought I won, but I was definitely shocked. But I will give a lot of credit. He was a tough opponent.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that he was going to be more of a wrestler, like all of his previous fights. He was more wrestling. And he came out with pretty solid striking, better than his
Mm-hmm.
previous fights. He was ranked very high in Tapology at that point in his career. I don't know where he is now. But definitely a good fight. Definitely a good learning experience. Some like my training part, like Ryan, I talk about him a lot. He's literally like my brother. He was like, that was like your show out fight where it's like you showed that you were able to do everything from like striking, wrestling, submissions, jiu-jitsu, control, like the whole nine.
When I looked at that fight, it just made me so much more excited to know that you were given the opportunity, as good as you are, you were given an opportunity to fight on a big stage. Like you're in front of the cameras. Like your fight is, I'll say, partially televised because you're on the undercard, so it's streamed. But like that's not always the case for a lot of these fights. Like you don't have the spotlight on you to the degree that you did, and you showed that you were good enough and you're able to compete at a very, very high level. And the fact that you just have that ammy tag on you now is really just more of a formality. It's like you are good enough to compete whenever you want at that next level. And so like when you talk to your coaches about this, you hit on a couple things before. You're like, you know what? It's really going to be in their hands. They're going to make that decision. I'm ready to roll with whatever they want to do. But if you had to like make a kind of a guess as to when you are going to make that leap, as soon as your hand heals up, is that what you're kind of looking for, or do you think you might have to do one more? Like, what are your thoughts?
I've talked to my coaches about it before. I think most likely my next fight will be my pro debut. Ideally, I've even had like good ideas of opponents who I'd like to fight for my pro debut. And if I have to do one more, and my coaches want me to do one more, I've actually I don't have an amateur belt. I've always wanted an amateur belt. My last fight, we were pushing it to be an amateur fight, for an amateur belt, but it didn't happen. And I really would like that amateur belt, but also I want to go pro. I broke my hand. I'm a full-time personal trainer and a fighter, so it's like I couldn't like I hold pads pretty much all the time. I couldn't hold pads for months, so it's like
Right.
that's a big shot to my income, this and that. And I had pro am fights, so it's like professional rules besides the elbows and knees, pretty much. So it's like I'm doing the risk and reward of a professional fighter without the reward of getting paid afterwards. And then I had to deal with all the fight medical insurance, where it's like I had to get surgery on my hand, I put a plate in, I had to deal with everything, not working as much for months. And I definitely think I'm at that level. I'm 25 years old now. It's like I'm not young, I'm not old. I feel like it's like time for me to go after it. And actually, a funny thing about that fight for CFFC, because I took that fight on 3 weeks' notice,
Right.
and then the opponent, like the kid, Bland, he pulled out 10 days before the fight, or 11 days before the fight, and they were looking for a new opponent. And exactly 1 week before the fight, they were like, "Oh, you're not fighting." And then that night, it was like a Friday night because I fought on Friday. The Friday before the fight, I got a text from my coach Nick, and he's like, "Bland's back in. You're on next week." And I was like, "All right." So it's like within a 3 week span, it was like taking a short notice fight, preparing the last few weeks, like game planning wise. Then like 14 days before, he pulled out. Me being like, "Well, are they gonna find a new guy? This and that." And then literally a week before the fight, game over. We're not gonna find anyone. That night, he's back in. You got to take the fight. I also ate like a little. I had some Chipotle. I
Of
was
course. Of
ready to
course.
get back on in, and then that, and then still go out there and perform. And it was really fun fighting for CFFC. I definitely want to fight for them again eventually. And yeah.
Absolutely. And before I let you go, Bill, I want to give you the opportunity. I want you to shout out whoever needs shouting out. If there are any sponsors you need to talk about, people at your gym, anything like that.
I always shout out Fit Food. They're my meal prep company. They're based out of Howell, New Jersey. I'm really good friends with the owner, Jay. He's one of the best people I know. And then obviously I just got to shout out like my coaches and like Nick Catone. He's honestly phenomenal coach, phenomenal man. He's really helped me. Shorty Rock is literally like one of my good friends, one of my like best people I know. He's a phenomenal coach. He's changed my whole game. Ryan, who I've already talked about a lot, he's literally my brother. He's fighting in 2 weeks. Watch it, CFFC, October 30th. He's gonna go out there, have a down performance, call out for a title shot. Let's get ready to go. And then I got to give a shout out to like Fabio Mandanero. She's my jiu-jitsu coach and She's a Combat Academy, and Alphonse Anello, who's the manager there, who's pretty much been like my life coach for like since I was a kid, where it's like always trying to make sure that I'm going the right direction when it comes to like doing the right things training wise, preparing for my next fight. And yeah, I was been thank you for having me, man. I would love to come back. There's an awesome little talk.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll definitely do that. And I grabbed the highlights from the Phelan fight. I grabbed them and I put them together. And for people who haven't seen that fight, you're about to right after we wrap here. It's gonna play, and I wanted to give you the opportunity, Bill. Like, what do people need to know about you as a fighter before they watch those clips if they've never seen you fight before?
I like to think of myself as a well-rounded mixed martial artist. I'm a dog where like even like in that caption for the highlights, like some people come to fight, some people come to win. I come to do both. I want to win every aspect. I want to get down and dirty. I'm willing to bite down on my mouthpiece. I'm also willing to fight smart if need be. I just want to get better and I just want to improve. And I think every fight I show a little bit of that where I got this a little better, that a little better, my jiu-jitsu a little better, my striking a little better. I'm keeping my hands up a little bit more, just improving every single fight. And I've never been in a boring fight, and I will pride myself to the day I die that I never want to be in a boring fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, the remarkable Bill Markle.